The city of Cairhien lay across hills against the river Alguenya, and Rand's first sight of it came from the hills to the north, by the light of the midday sun. Elricain Tavalin and the 50 Cairhienin soldiers still seemed like guards to him. The more, since crossing the bridge at the Gaelin, they became more stiff the further south they rode. But Loial and Hurin did not appear to mind, so he tried not to. He studied the city, as large as any he had seen. Fat ships and broad barges filled the river, and tall granaries sprawled along the far bank. But Cairhien seemed to be laid out in a precise grid behind its high grey walls. Those walls themselves made a perfect square, with one side hard along the river. In just as exact a pattern, towers rose within the walls, soaring as much as 20 times the height of the wall, yet even from the hills Rand could see that each one ended in a jagged top. Outside the city walls, surrounding them from riverbank to riverbank, lay a warren of streets crisscrossing at all angles and teeming with people. Foregate, Rand knew it was called, from Hurin. Once there had been a market village for every city gate, but over the years they had all grown into one, a hodgepodge of streets and alleys growing up every which way. As Rand and the others rode into those dirt streets, Tavalin put some of his soldiers to clearing a path through the throng, shouting and urging their horses forward as if to trample any who did not get out of the way quickly. People moved aside with no more than a glance, as if it were an everyday occurrence. Rand found himself smiling, though. The Foregate people's clothes were shabby more often than not, yet much of it was colourful, and there was a raucous bustle of life to the place. Hawkers cried their wares, and shopkeepers called for people to examine the goods displayed on tables before their shops. Barbers, fruit peddlers, knife sharpeners, men and women offering a dozen services and 100 things for sale, wandered through the crowds. Music drifted through the babel from more than one structure. At first Rand thought they were inns, but the signs out front all showed men playing flutes or harps, tumbling or juggling, and large as they were, they had no windows. Most of the buildings in Foregate seemed to be wood, however big they were, and a good many looked new, if poorly made. Rand gaped at several that stood 7 stories or more. They swayed slightly, though the people hurrying in and out did not seem to notice. Peasants, Tavalin muttered, staring straight ahead in disgust. Look at them, corrupted by outland ways. They should not be here. Where should they be? Rand asked. The Cairhienin officer glared at him and spurred his horse forward, frogging at the crowd with his quirt. Hurin touched Rand's arm. It was the Aiel War, Lord Rand. He looked to make sure none of the soldiers were close enough to hear. Many of the farmers were afraid to go back to their lands near the spine of the world, and they all came here near enough. That's why Galdrian has the river full of grain barges up from Andor and Tyr. There's no crops coming from farms in the east because there aren't any farms anymore. Best not to mention it to a Cairhienin, though, my lord. They like to pretend the war never happened, or at least that they won it. Despite Tavalin's quirt, they were forced to halt while a strange procession crossed their path. 6 men, beating tambours and dancing, led the way for a string of huge puppets, each half again as tall as the men who worked them with long poles. Giant, crowned figures of men and women in long, ornate robes bowed to the crowd amid the shapes of fanciful beasts, a lion with wings, a goat walking on its hind legs with 2 heads, both of which were apparently meant to be breathing fire from the crimson streamers hanging from the 2 mouths. Something that seemed to be half cat and half eagle, and another with a bear's head on a man's body, which Rand took to be a Trolloc. The crowd cheered and laughed as they pranced by. Man who made that never saw a Trolloc, Hurin grumbled. Head's too big and it's too skinny. Likely didn't believe in them either, my lord, any more than in those other things. The only monsters these Foregate folk believe in are Aiel. Are they having a festival? Rand asked. He did not see any sign of it other than the procession, but he thought that there must be a reason for that. Tavalin ordered his soldiers forward again. No more than every day, Rand, Loial said, walking alongside his horse, the blanket-wrapped chest still strapped to his saddle. The Ogier drew as many looks as the puppets had. Some even laughed and clapped as they had for the puppets. I fear Galdrian keeps his people quiet by entertaining them. He gives gleemen and musicians the king's gift, a bounty in silver, to perform here in the Foregate, and he sponsors horse races down by the river every day. There are fireworks many nights, too. He sounded disgusted. Elder Haman says Galdrian is a disgrace. He blinked, realizing what he had said, and looked around hurriedly to see if any of the soldiers had heard. None seemed to have. "Fireworks," Hurin said, nodding. "The illuminators have built a chapter house here, I've heard, the same as in Tanchico. I didn't half mind seeing the fireworks when I was here before." Rand shook his head. He had never seen fireworks elaborate enough to require even one illuminator. He had heard they only left Tanchico to put on displays for rulers. It was a strange place he was coming to. At the tall, square archway of the city gate, Tavolin ordered a halt and dismounted by a squat stone building just inside the walls. It had arrow slits instead of windows, and a heavy, iron-bound door. "A moment, my Lord Rand," the officer said. Tossing his reins to one of the soldiers, he disappeared inside. With a wary look at the soldiers, they sat their horses rigidly in two long files. Rand wondered what they would do if he and Loial and Hurin tried to leave. He took the opportunity to study the city that lay before him. Cairhien proper was a sharp contrast to the chaotic bustle of the Foregate. Broad, paved streets, wide enough to make the people in them seem fewer than they were, crossed each other at right angles. Just as in Tremoncian, the hills had been carved and terraced to straight lines. Closed sedan chairs, some with small pennants bearing the sigil of a house, moved with deliberateness, and carriages rolled down the street slowly. People went silently in dark clothes, with no bright colours except here and there slashes across the breast of coat or dress. The more slashes, the more proudly the wearer moved, but no one laughed or even smiled. The buildings on their terraces were all of stone, and the ornamentation was straight-lined and sharp-angled. There were no hawkers or peddlers in the streets, and even the shops seemed subdued, with only small signs and no wares displayed outside. He could see the great towers more clearly now. Scaffolds of lashed poles surrounded them, and workmen swarmed on the scaffolding, laying new stones to push the towers higher still. "The topless towers of Cairhien," Loial murmured sadly. "Well, they were tall enough to warrant the name, once. When the Aiel took Cairhien, about the time you were born, the towers burned and cracked and fell. I don't see any ogier among the stonemasons. No ogier could like working here. The Cairhienin want what they want, without embellishment, but there were ogier when I was here before." Tavolin came out trailing another officer and two clerks, one carrying a large wood-bound ledger and the other a tray with writing implements. The front of the officer's head was shaven like Tavolin's, though advancing baldness seemed to have taken more hair than the razor. Both officers looked from Rand to the chest hidden by Loial's striped blanket and back again. Neither asked what was under the blanket. Tavolin had looked at it often, on the way from Tremoncian, but he had never asked either. The balding man looked at Rand's sword too, and pursed his lips for an instant. Tavolin gave the other officer's name as Asan Sander, and announced loudly, "Lord Rand of House Ulthor in Andor, and his man called Hurin, with Loial, an Ogier of Stedding Shangtai." The clerk with the ledger opened it across his two arms, and Sander wrote the names in a round hand. "You must return to this guardhouse by this same hour tomorrow, my lord," Sander said, leaving the sanding to the second clerk, "and give the name of the inn where you are staying." Rand looked at the staid streets of Cairhien, then back at the liveliness of the Foregate. "Can you tell me the name of a good inn out there?" He nodded to the Foregate. Hurin made a frantic hist and leaned close. "It would not be proper, Lord Rand," he whispered. "If you stay in the Foregate, being a lord and all, they'll be sure you are up to something." Rand could see the sniffer was right. Sander's mouth had dropped open and Tavolin's brows had risen at his question, and they were both still watching him intently. He wanted to tell them he was not playing their great game, but instead he said, "We will take rooms in the city. We can go now?" "Of course, my Lord Rand." Sander made a bow. "But you're and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. The inn, I will let you know when we find one." Rand turned red, then paused. Celine's note crackled in his pocket. "I need to find a young woman from Cairhien. The Lady Selene. She is my age and beautiful. I don't know her house." Sander and Tavolin exchanged looks, then Sander said, "I will make inquiries, my lord. Perhaps I will be able to tell you something when you come tomorrow." Rand nodded and led Loial and Hurin into the city. They attracted little notice, though there were few riders. Even Loial attracted almost none. The people seemed nearly ostentatious about minding their own business. "Will they take it the wrong way?" Rand asked Hurin. "My asking after Selene. Who can say with Cairhienin, Lord Rand? They seem to think everything has to do with Daes Dae'mar." Rand shrugged. He felt as if people were looking at him. He could not wait to get a good, plain coat again and stop pretending to be what he was not. Hurin knew several inns in the city, though his time in Cairhien had been spent mainly in the Foregate. The sniffer led them to one called the Defender of the Dragon Wall, the sign bearing a crowned man with his foot on another man's chest and his sword at the man's throat. The fellow on his back had red hair. A hostler came to take their horses, darting quick looks at Rand and at Loial when he thought he was not observed. Rand told himself to stop having fancies. Not everyone in the city could be playing this game of theirs. And if they were, he was no part of it. The common room was neat, with the tables laid out as strictly as the city, and only a few people at them. They glanced up at the newcomers, then back to their wine immediately. Rand had the feeling they were still watching, though, and listening. A small fire burned in the big fireplace, though the day was warming. The innkeeper was a plump, unctuous man with a single stripe of green across his dark grey coat. He gave a start at his first sight of them, and Rand was not surprised. Loial, with the chest in his arms under its striped blanket, had to duck his head to make it in through the door. Hurin was burdened with all their saddlebags and bundles, and his own red coat was a sharp contrast to the sombre colours the people at the tables wore. The innkeeper took in Rand's coat and his sword, and his oily smile came back. He bowed, washing his smooth hands. "Forgive me, my lord. It was just that for a moment I took you for... forgive me. My brain is not what it was." "You wish rooms, my lord?" He added another, lesser bow for Loial. "I'm called Quale, my lord." He thought I was Aiel, Rand thought sourly. He wanted to be gone from Cairhien, but it was the one place Ingtar might find them, and Selene had said she would wait for him in Cairhien. It took a little time for their rooms to be readied, Quale explaining with too many smiles and bows that it was necessary to move a bed for Loial. Rand wanted them all to share a room again, but between the innkeeper's scandalized looks and Hurin's insistence, "We have to show these Cairhienin we know what's right as well as they do, Lord Rand." They ended with two, one for him alone, with a connecting door. The rooms were much the same, except that theirs had two beds, one size for an ogier, while his had only one bed, and that almost as big as the other two, with massive square posts that nearly reached the ceiling. His tall-backed, padded chair and the washstand were square and massive too, and the wardrobe standing against his wall was carved in a heavy, rigid style that made the thing look ready enough to fall over on him. A pair of windows siding his bed looked out on the street 2 floors below. As soon as the innkeeper left, Rand opened the door and admitted Loial and Hurin into his room. "This place gnaws at me," he told them. "Everybody looks at you as if they think you're doing something. I'm going back to the Foregate for an hour anyway. At least the people laugh there. Which of you is willing to take the first watch on the Horn?" "I will stay," Loial said quickly. "I'd like a chance to do a little reading. Just because I didn't see any ogier does not mean there are no stonemasons down from Stedding Tisofu. It is not far from the city. I think you would want to meet them. Ah, your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change was their code. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change was their code." "No, Rand. They asked enough questions the last time about why I was outside alone, as it was. If they've had word from Stedding Shangtai, your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change was their code. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change was their code. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change was their code." "Well, I will just rest here and read, I think." Rand shook his head. He often forgot that Loial had run away from home, in effect, to see the world. "What about you, Hurin?" There's music in the Foregate and people laughing. I'll wager no one is playing Daes Dae'mar there. I would not be so certain of that myself, Lord Rand. In any case, I thank you for the invitation, but I think not. There's so many fights and killings, too, in Foregate, that it stinks, if you know what I mean. Not that they're likely to bother a lord, of course. The soldiers will be down on them if they did. But if it pleases you, I would like to have a drink in the common room. Hurin, you don't need my permission for anything. You know that. As you say, my lord. The sniffer gave a suggestion of a bow. Rand took a deep breath. If they did not leave Cairhien soon, Hurin would be bowing and scraping left and right. And if Mat and Perrin saw that, they would never let him forget it. I hope nothing delays Ingtar. If he doesn't come quickly, we'll have to take the horn back to Fal Dara ourselves. He touched Celine's note through his coat. We will have to. Loial, I'll come back so you can see some of the city. I'd rather not risk it, Loial said. Hurin accompanied Rand downstairs. As soon as they reached the common room, Quale was bowing in front of Rand, pushing a tray at him. 3 folded and sealed parchments lay on the tray. Rand took them, since that was what the innkeeper seemed to intend. They were a fine grade of parchment, soft and smooth to his touch. Expensive. What are these? He asked. Quale bowed again. Invitations, of course, my lord. From 3 of the noble houses. He bowed himself away. Who would send me invitations? Rand turned them over in his hand. None of the men at the tables looked up, but he had the feeling they were watching just the same. He did not recognize the seals. None was the crescent moon and stars Celine had used. Who would know I was here? Everyone by now, Lord Rand, Hurin said quietly. He seemed to feel eyes watching, too. The guards at the gate would not keep their mouths closed about an outland lord coming to Cairhien. The hostler, the innkeeper. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Everybody tells what they know where they think it will do them the most good, my lord. With a grimace, Rand took 2 steps and hurled the invitations into the fire. They caught immediately. I'm not playing Daes Dae'mar, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Not even Quale looked at him. I've nothing to do with your great game. I am just here to wait for some friends. Hurin caught his arm. Please, Lord Rand. His voice was an urgent whisper. Please don't do that again. Again? You really think I'll receive more? I'm certain. Light, but you mind me of the time. Tiva got so mad at a hornet buzzing round his ears, he kicked the nest. You've likely just convinced everyone in the room you are in some deep part of the game. It must be deep, as they'll see it, if you deny playing at all. Every lord and lady in Cairhien plays it. The sniffer glanced at the invitations, curling blackly in the fire, and winced. And you have surely made enemies of 3 houses. Not great houses, or they'd not have moved so quickly, but still noble. You must answer any more invitations you receive, my lord. Decline, if you will. They'll read things into whose invitations you do decline, and into whose you accept. Of course, if you decline them all or accept them all, I'll have no part of it, Rand said quietly. We are leaving Cairhien as soon as we can. He thrust his fists into his coat pockets and felt Celine's note crumple. Pulling it out, he smoothed it on his coat front. As soon as we can, he muttered, putting it back in his pocket again. Have your drink, Hurin. He stalked out angrily, not sure whether he was angry with himself, or with Cairhien and its great game, or Celine for vanishing, or Moiraine. She had started it all, stealing his coats and giving him a lord's clothes instead. Even now that he called himself free of them, and Aes Sedai still managed to interfere in his life, and without even being there. He went back through the same gate by which he had entered the city, since that was the way he knew. A man standing in front of the guardhouse took note of him. His bright coat marked him out, as well as his height among the Cairhienin, and hurried inside, but Rand did not notice. The laughter and music of the Foregate were pulling him on. If his gold-embroidered red coat made him stand out inside the walls, it fit right into the Foregate. Many of the men milling through the crowded streets were dressed just as darkly as those in the city, but just as many wore coats of red, or blue, or green, or gold, some bright enough to be a tinker's clothes, and even more of the women had embroidered dresses and coloured scarves or shawls. Most of the finery was tattered and ill-fitting, as if made for someone else originally, but if some of those who wore it eyed his fine coat, none seemed to take it amiss. Once he had to stop for another procession of giant puppets. While the drummers beat their tambours and capered, a pig-faced Trolloc with tusks fought a man in a crown. After a few desultory blows, the Trolloc collapsed to laughter and cheers from the onlookers. Rand grunted, "They don't die so easily as that." He glanced into one of the large, windowless buildings, stopping to look through the door. To his surprise, it seemed to be one huge room, open to the sky in the middle and lined with balconies, with a large dais at one end. He had never seen or heard of anything like it. People jammed the balconies and the floor watching people perform on the dais. He peeked into others as he passed them and saw jugglers and musicians, any number of tumblers, and even a gleeman with his cloak of patches, declaiming a story from The Great Hunt of the Horn in sonorous voice high chant. That made him think of Thom Merrilin, and he hurried on. Memories of Thom were always sad. Thom had been a friend who had died for him, while I ran away and let him die. In another of the big structures, a woman in voluminous white robes appeared to make things vanish from one basket and appear in another, then disappear from her hands in great puffs of smoke. The crowd watching her oohed and ahed loudly. "2 coppers, my good lord," a ratty little man in the doorway said. 2 coppers to see the Aes Sedai. "I don't think so." Rand glanced back at the woman. A white dove had appeared in her hands. "Aes Sedai? No." He gave the ratty man a small bow and left. He was making his way through the throng, wondering what to see next, when a deep voice, accompanied by the plucking of a harp, drifted out from a doorway with the sign of a juggler over it. "Die, your and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Cold blows the wind down Shara Pass, cold lies the grave unmarked. Yet every year at Sunday, upon those piled stones appears a single rose, one crystal teardrop like dew upon the petals, laid by the fair hand of Dunsinane, for she keeps fast to the bargain made by Ragosh Eagle-Eye." The voice drew Rand like a rope. He pushed through the doorway as applause rose within. "2 coppers, my good lord," said a rat-faced man who could have been twin to the other. 2 coppers to see." Rand dug out some coins and thrust them at the man. He walked on in a daze, staring at the man bowing on the dais to the clapping of his listeners, cradling his harp in one arm and with the other spreading his patch-covered cloak as if to trap all the sound they made. He was a tall man, lanky and not young, with long moustaches as white as the hair on his head. And when he straightened and saw Rand, the eyes that widened were sharp and blue. "Thom." Rand's whisper was lost in the noise of the crowd. Holding Rand's eye, Thom Merrilin nodded slightly toward a small door beside the dais. Then he was bowing again, smiling and basking in the applause. Rand made his way to the door and through it. It was only a small hallway, with 3 steps leading up to the dais. In the other direction from the dais, Rand could see a juggler practicing with coloured balls and 6 tumblers limbering themselves. Thom appeared on the steps, limping as though his right leg did not bend as well as it had. He eyed the juggler and the tumblers, blew out his moustaches disdainfully, and turned to Rand. "All they want to hear is the great hunt of the Horn." You would think, with the news from Hadden Merk and Saldair, one of them would ask for the Karaethon Cycle. Well, maybe not that, but I'd pay myself to tell something else. He looked Rand up and down. "You look as if you're doing well, boy." He fingered Rand's collar and pursed his lips. "Very well." Rand could not help laughing. "I left Whitebridge sure you were dead. Moraine said you were still alive, but I, your and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Light, Thom, it's good to see you again. I should have gone back to help you. Bigger fool if you had, boy. That fade," he looked around, there was no one close enough to hear, but he lowered his voice anyway, "had no interest in me. It left me a little present of a stiff leg, and ran off after you and Matt. All you could have done was die." He paused, looking thoughtful. Moraine said, "I was still alive, did she? Is she with you then?" Rand shook his head. To his surprise, Thom seemed disappointed. "Too bad, in a way. She's a fine woman, even if she is. You're and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change was their code. You're and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change was their code." He left it unsaid, so it was Matt or Perrin she was after. "I won't ask which. They were good boys and I don't want to know." Rand shifted uneasily and gave a start when Thom fixed him with a bony finger. "What I do want to know is, do you still have my harp and flute? I want them back, boy. What I have now are not fit for a pig to play. I have them, Thom. I'll bring them to you, I promise. I can't believe you're alive. And I can't believe you aren't in Ilion. The great hunt setting out, the prize for the best telling of the great hunt of the Horn. You were dying to go." Thom snorted. "After Whitebridge? Likely I'd die if I did go. Even if I could have reached the boat before it sailed, Doman and his whole crew would be spreading the tale all over Ilion about how I was being chased by Trollocs, if they saw the fade or heard of it before Doman cut his lines. You're and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change was their code. You're and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change was their code. You're and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change was their code. Most Ilioners think Trollocs and Fades are fables, but enough others might want to know why a man was pursued by them to make Ilion somewhat more than uncomfortable. Thom, I have so much to tell you." The gleeman cut him off. "Later, boy." He was exchanging glares down the length of the hall with the narrow-faced man from the door. "If I don't go back and tell another, he will no doubt send the juggler out, and that lot will tear the hall down around our heads. You come to the Bunch of Grapes, just beyond the Jangai Gate. I have a room there. Anyone can tell you where to find it. I'll be there in another hour or so. One more tale will have to satisfy them." He started back up the steps, flinging over his shoulder, "And bring my harp and my flute." Rand darted through the common room of the Defender of the Dragon Wall and hurried upstairs, grinning at the startled look the innkeeper had given him. Rand wanted to grin at everything. Thom's alive. He flung open the door to his room and went straight to the wardrobe. Loial and Hurin put their heads in from the other room, both in their shirt sleeves and with pipes in their teeth, trailing thin streams of smoke. "Has something happened, Lord Rand?" Hurin asked anxiously. Rand slung the bundle made from Thom's cloak on his shoulder. "The best thing that could, next to Ingchar coming. Thom Merrilin's alive. And he's here, in Cairhien." "The gleeman you told me about?" Loial said. "That is wonderful, Rand. I would like to meet him. Then come with me, if Hurin's willing to keep watch a while. It would be a pleasure, Lord Rand." Hurin took the pipe out of his mouth. "That lot in the common room kept trying to pump me without letting on what they were doing, of course, about who you are, my lord, and why we're in Cairhien. I told them we were waiting here to meet friends, but being Cairhienin, they figured I was hiding something deeper. Let them think what they want. Come on, Loial. I think not." The Ogier sighed. "I really would rather stay here." He raised a book with a thick finger marking his place. "I can meet Thom Merrilin some other time. Loial, you can't stay cooped up in here forever. We do not even know how long we'll be in Cairhien. Anyway, we didn't see any Ogier, and if we do, they would not be hunting for you, would they? Not hunting precisely, but you're and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change was their code. You're and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change was their code. You're and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change was their code." Rand, I may have been too hasty in leaving Stedding Shangtai the way I did. When I do go home, I may be in a great deal of trouble. His ears wilted. Even if I wait until I'm as old as Elder Haman, perhaps I could find an abandoned steading to stay in until then. If Elder Haman won't let you come back, you can live in Emon's field. It's a pretty place, a beautiful place. I'm sure it is, Rand, but that would never work. You see, we will talk about it when it comes to that, Loial. Now you are coming to see Thom." The Ogier stood half again as tall as Rand, but Rand pushed him into his long tunic and cloak and down the stairs. When they came pounding through the common room, Rand winked at the innkeeper, then laughed at his startled look. Let him think I'm off to play his bloody great game. Let him think what he wants. Thom's alive. Once through the Jangai Gate and the east wall of the city, everyone seemed to know the bunch of grapes. Rand and Loial quickly found themselves there, on a street that was quiet with a foregate, with the sun halfway down the afternoon sky. It was an old 3-story structure, wooden and rickety, but the common room was clean and full of people. Some men were playing at dice in one corner, and some women at darts in another. Half had the look of Cairhienin, slight and pale, but Rand heard Andoran accents as well as others he did not know. All wore the clothes of the Foregate, though, a blend of the styles of half a dozen countries. A few looked around when he and Loial came in, but they all turned back to what they had been doing. The innkeeper was a woman with hair as white as Thom's, and sharp eyes that studied Loial as well as Rand. She was not Cairhienin by her dark skin and her speech. Thom Merrilin, aye, he has a room. Top of the stairs, first door on the right. Likely Dena will let you wait for him there. She eyed Rand's red coat, with its herons on the high collar and golden brambles embroidered up the sleeves, and his sword, my lord. The stairs creaked under Rand's boots, let alone Loial's. Rand was not sure if the building would stand up much longer. He found the door and knocked, wondering who Dena was. "Come in," a woman's voice called. "I cannot open it for you." Rand opened the door hesitantly and put his head in. A big, rumpled bed was shoved against one wall, and the rest of the room was all but taken up by a pair of wardrobes, several brass-bound trunks and chests, a table and 2 wooden chairs. The slender woman sitting cross-legged on the bed with her skirts tucked under her was keeping 6 coloured balls spinning in a wheel between her hands. "Whatever it is," she said, looking at her juggling, "leave it on the table. Thom will pay you when he comes back." "Are you Dena?" Rand asked. She snatched the balls out of the air and turned to regard him. She was only a handful of years older than he, pretty, with fair Cairhienin skin and dark hair hanging loose to her shoulders. "I do not know you. This is my room, mine and Thom Merrilin's." "The innkeeper said you might let us wait here for Thom," Rand said. "If you're Dena, us?" Rand moved into the room so Loial could duck inside, and the young woman's eyebrows lifted. "So the Ogier have come back. I'm Dena. What do you want?" She looked at Rand's coat so deliberately that the failure to add "my lord" had to be purposeful, though her brows went up again at the herons on his scabbard and sword hilt. Rand hefted the bundle he carried. "I brought Thom back his harp and his flute, and I want to visit with him," he added quickly. She seemed on the point of telling him to leave them. "I haven't seen him in a long time." She eyed the bundle. "Thom always moans about losing the best flute and the best harp he ever had. You would think he was a court bard, the way he carries on. Very well, you can wait, but I must practice. Thom says he will let me perform in the halls next week." She rose gracefully and took one of the 2 chairs, motioning Loial to sit on the bed. "Zira would make Thom pay for 6 chairs if you broke one of these, friend Ogier." Rand gave their names as he sat in the other chair. It creaked alarmingly under even his weight, and asked doubtfully, "Are you Thom's apprentice?" Dena gave a small smile. "You might say that." She had resumed her juggling, and her eyes were on the whirling balls. "I have never heard of a woman gleeman," Loial said. "I will be the first." The one big circle became 2 smaller, overlapping circles. "I will see the whole world before I am done. Thom says once we have enough money, we will go down to Ter." She switched to juggling 3 balls in each hand. "And then maybe out to the Sea Folks Islands. The Athan Mier pay gleeman well." Rand eyed the room with all the chests and trunks. It did not look like the room of someone intending to move on soon. There was even a flower growing in a pot on the windowsill. His gaze fell on the single big bed where Loial was sitting. "This is my room, mine and Thom Merrilin's." Dena gave him a challenging look through the large wheel she had resumed. Rand's face reddened. He cleared his throat. "Maybe we ought to wait downstairs," he began when the door opened and Thom came in with his cloak flapping around his ankles, patches fluttering. cased flute and harp hung on his back. The cases were reddish wood, polished by handling. Dena made the balls disappear inside her dress and ran to throw her arms around Tom's neck, standing a tiptoe to do it. "I missed you," she said, and kissed him. The kiss went on for some time, so long that Rand was beginning to wonder if he and Loial should leave, but Dena let her heels drop to the floor with a sigh. "Do you know what that lack-wit Segan's done now, girl?" Tom said, looking down at her. "He's taken on a pack of louts who call themselves players. They walk around pretending to be Rogosh Eagle-Eye, and Blaze, and Guidel Cain, and Yor, and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Yor, and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Yor, and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code." Ah, they hang a scrap of painted canvas behind them, supposed to make the audience believe these fools are in Matuchin Hall or the high passes of the Mountains of Doom. I make the listener see every banner, smell every battle, feel every emotion. I make them believe they are Guidel Cain. Segan will have his hall torn down around his ears if he puts this lot on to follow me. Tom, we have visitors. Loial, son of Arant, son of Halan. Oh, and a boy who calls himself Rand Althor. Tom looked over her head at Rand, frowning. "Leave us for a while, Dena. Here." He pressed some silver coins into her hand. "Your knives are ready. Why don't you go pay Ivan for them?" He brushed her smooth cheek with a gnarled knuckle. "Go on. I'll make it up to you." She gave him a dark look, but she tossed her cloak around her shoulders, muttering, "Ivan better have the balance right." "She'll be a bard one day," Tom said with a note of pride after she was gone. "She listens to a tale once only, mind, and she has it right, not just the words, but every nuance, every rhythm. She has a fine hand on the harp, and she played the flute better the first time she picked it up than you ever did." He set the wooden instrument cases atop one of the larger trunks, then dropped into the chair she had abandoned. "When I passed through Cairhien on the way here, Basil Gill told me you'd left in company with an Ogier, among others." He bowed toward Loial, even managing a flourish of his cloak, despite the fact that he was sitting on it. "I am pleased to meet you, Loial, son of Arant, son of Halan. And I to meet you, Thom Merrilin." Loial stood to make his bow in return. When he straightened, his head almost brushed the ceiling, and he quickly sat down again. "The young woman said she wants to be a gleeman." Tom's head shake was disparaging. "That's no life for a woman. Not much of a life for a man, for that. Wandering from town to town, village to village, wondering how they'll try to cheat you this time. Half the time wondering where your next meal is coming from. No, I'll talk her around. She'll be court bard to a king or a queen before she's done." "Ah, you didn't come here to talk about Dena, my instruments boy. You've brought them?" Rand pushed the bundle across the table. Tom undid it hurriedly. He blinked when he saw it was his old cloak, all covered with colourful patches like the one he wore, and opened the hard leather flute case, nodding at the sight of the gold and silver flute nestled inside. "I earned my bed and meals with that after we parted," Rand said. "I know," the gleeman replied dryly. "I stopped at some of the same inns, but I had to make do with juggling and a few simple stories since you had my— You didn't touch the harp?" He pulled open the other dark leather case and took out a gold and silver harp as ornate as the flute, cradling it in his hands like a baby. "Your clumsy sheepherder's fingers were never meant for the harp." "I didn't touch it," Rand assured him. Tom plucked 2 strings, wincing. "At least you weren't fool enough to try keeping it tuned," he muttered. "Could have ruined it." Rand leaned across the table toward him. "Tom, you wanted to go to Ilion, to see the great hunt set out, and be one of the first to make new stories about it, but you couldn't. What would you say if I told you you could still be a part of it?" "A big part?" Loial stirred uneasily. "Rand, are you sure?" "Your and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code." Rand waved into silence, his eyes on Tom. Tom glanced at the Ogier and frowned. "That would depend on what part and how." if you've reason to believe one of the hunters is coming this way. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. I suppose they could have left Ilion already, but he'd be weeks reaching here if he rode straight on, and why would he? Is this one of the fellows who never went to Ilion? He'll never make it into the stories without the blessing, whatever he does. It doesn't matter if the hunters left Ilion or not. Rand heard Loial's breath catch. Thom, we have the Horn of Valere. For a moment there was dead silence. Thom broke it with a great guffaw of laughter. You two have the horn. A shepherd and a beardless Ogier have the horn of. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. He doubled over, pounding his knee. The Horn of Valere. But we do have it, Loial said seriously. Thom drew a deep breath. Small aftershocks of laughter still seemed to catch him unaware. I don't know what you found, but I can take you to 10 taverns where a fellow will tell you that he knows a man who knows the man who's already found the horn, and he will tell you how it was found too, as long as you buy his ale. I can take you to 3 men who will sell you the horn and swear their souls under the light. It's the real one and true. There is even a lord in the city has what he claims is the horn locked up inside his manor. He says it's a treasure handed down in his house since the breaking. I don't know if the hunters will ever find the horn, but they will hunt down 10,000 lies along the way. Moiraine says it's the horn, Rand said. Thom's mirth was cut short. She does she? I thought you said she was not with you. She isn't, Thom. I have not seen her since I left Faldara in Cairhien, and for a month before that she said no more than 2 words together to me. He could not keep the bitterness out of his voice. And when she did talk, I wish she'd kept on ignoring me. I'll never dance to her tune again. The light burn her and every other Aes Sedai. No, not Egwene, not Nynaeve. He was conscious of Thom watching him closely. She isn't here, Thom. I do not know where she is, and I do not care. Well, at least you have sense enough to keep it secret. If you hadn't, it would be all over the Foregate by now, and half of Cairhien would be lying in wait to take it away. Half the world. Oh, we've kept it secret, Thom, and I have to bring it back to Faldara, without Darkfriends or anyone else taking it away. That's story enough for you right there, isn't it? I could use a friend who knows the world. You've been everywhere. You know things I can't even imagine. Loial and Hurin know more than I do, but we're all 3 floundering in deep water. Hurin, your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. No, don't tell me how. I do not want to know. The gleeman pushed back his chair and went to stare out of the window. The Horn of Valere. That means the last battle is coming. Who will notice? Did you see the people laughing in the streets out there? Let the grain barges stop a week and they won't laugh. Galdrian will think they've all become Aiel. The nobles all play the game of houses, scheming to get close to the king, scheming to gain more power than the king, scheming to pull down Galdrian and be the next king. Or queen? They will think Tarmon Gaidon is only a ploy in the game. He turned away from the window. I don't suppose you're talking about simply riding to Cairhien and handing the horn to who? The king? Why Cairhien? The legends all tie the horn to Ilion. Rand looked at Loial. The Ogier's ears were sagging. Cairhien, because I know who to give it to there. And there are Trollocs and Darkfriends after us. Why does that not surprise me? No, I may be an old fool, but I will be an old fool in my own way. You take the glory, boy. Thom, no! There was a silence, broken only by the creaking of the bed as Loial shifted. Finally, Rand said, Loial, would you mind leaving Thom and me alone for a bit? Please? Loial looked surprised. The tufts on his ears went almost to points, but he nodded and rose. That dice game in the common room looked interesting. Perhaps they will let me play. Thom eyed Rand suspiciously as the door closed behind the ogier. Rand hesitated. There were things he needed to know, things he was sure Thom knew. The gleeman had once seemed to know a great deal about a surprising number of things, but he was not sure how to ask. "Thom," he said at last, "are there any books that have the Karaethon Cycle in them? Easier to call it that than the prophecies of the dragon." "In the great libraries," Thom said slowly. "Any number of translations, and even in the old tongue here and there." Rand started to ask if there was any way for him to find one, but the gleeman went on. "The old tongue has music in it, but too many even of the nobles are impatient with listening to it these days. Nobles are all expected to know the old tongue, but many only learn enough to impress people who don't. Translations don't have the same sound unless they're in high chant, and sometimes that changes meanings even more than most translations. There is one verse in the cycle. It doesn't scan well translated word for word, but there's no meaning lost. That goes like this. Twice and twice shall he be marked, twice to live and twice to die. Once the heron to set his path, twice the heron to name him true. Once the dragon for remembrance lost, twice the dragon for the price he must pay." He reached out and touched the herons embroidered on Rand's high collar. For a moment, Rand could only gape at him, and when he could speak, his voice was unsteady. "The sword makes 5. Hilt, scabbard, and blade." He turned his hand down on the table, hiding the brand on his palm. For the first time since Celine's salve had done its work, he could feel it. Not hurting, but he knew it was there. "So they do," Thom barked a laugh. "There's another comes to mind. Twice dawns the day when his blood is shed. Once for mourning, once for birth. Red on black, the dragon's blood stains the rock of Sheol Ghul. In the pit of doom shall his blood free men from the shadow." Rand shook his head, denying, but Thom seemed not to notice. "I don't see how a day can dawn twice, but then a lot of it doesn't really make much sense. The Stone of Tyr will never fall till Kalandor is wielded by the Dragon Reborn, but the sword that cannot be touched lies in the heart of the stone, so how can he wield it first, eh? Well, be that as it may. I suspect Aes Sedai would want to make events fit the prophecies as closely as they can. Dying somewhere in the blasted lands would be a high price to pay for going along with them." It was an effort for Rand to make his voice calm, but he did it. "No Aes Sedai are using me for anything. I told you the last I saw of Moraine was in Shi'Nar. She said I could go where I wanted, and I left. And there's no Aes Sedai with you now? None at all. None." Thom knuckled his dangling white moustaches. He seemed satisfied and at the same time puzzled. "Then why ask about the prophecies? Why send the ogier out of the room? I, your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by them's, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by them's, by the first change, was their code." Didn't want to upset him. He's nervous enough about the horn. That's what I wanted to ask. Is the horn mentioned in the prophecies? He still could not make himself say it all the way out. All these false dragons, and now the horn is found. Everybody thinks the Horn of Valere is supposed to summon dead heroes to fight the Dark One in the last battle, and the your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by them's, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by them's, by the first change, was their code. The Dragon Reborn. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by them's, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by them's, by the first change, was their code. Is supposed to fight the Dark One in the last battle. It seemed natural enough to ask. I suppose it is. Not many know that about the Dragon Reborn fighting the last battle, or if they do, they think he'll fight alongside the Dark One. Not many read the prophecies to find out. What was that you said about the horn? Supposed to? I've learnt a few things since we parted, Thom. They will come for whoever blows the horn, even a dark friend. Bushy eyebrows rose nearly to Thom's hairline. Now that I didn't know, you have learned a few things. It doesn't mean I would let the White Tower use me for a false dragon. I don't want anything to do with Aes Sedai, or false dragons, or the power, or your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by them's, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by them's, by the first change, was their code. Rand bit his tongue. Get mad, and you start babbling. Fool. For a time, boy, I thought you were the one Moiraine wanted, and I even thought I knew why. You know, no man chooses to channel the power. It is something that happens to him, like a disease. You cannot blame a man for falling sick, even if it might kill you too. Your nephew could channel, couldn't he? You told me that was why you helped us, because your nephew had had trouble with the White Tower, and there was nobody to help him. There's only one kind of trouble men can have with Aes Sedai. Tom studied the tabletop, pursing his lips. I don't suppose there is any use in denying it. You understand, it is not the kind of thing a man talks about, having a male relative who could channel. Ah, the Red Ajah never gave Oin a chance. They gentled him, and then he died. He just gave up wanting to live. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by them's, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by them's, by the first change, was their code. He exhaled sadly. Rand shivered. Why didn't Moiraine do that to me? A chance, Tom? Do you mean there was some way he could have dealt with it? Not gone mad? Not died? Owen held it off almost 3 years. He never hurt anyone. He didn't use the power unless he had to, and then only to help his village. He, your, and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by them's, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by them's, by the first change, was their code. Tom threw up his hands. I suppose there was no choice. The people where he lived told me he was acting strange that whole last year. They did not much want to talk about it, and they nearly stoned me when they found out I was his uncle. I suppose he was going mad, but he was my blood boy. I can't love the Aes Sedai for what they did to him, even if they had to. If Moiraine's let you go, then you are well out of it. For a moment, Rand was silent. Fool. Of course there's no way to deal with it. You're going to go mad and die whatever you do. But Baalsamon said no. He coloured under Tom's scrutiny. I mean, your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by them's, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by them's, by the first change, was their code. I am out of it, Tom, but I still have the Horn of Valere. Think of it, Tom. The Horn of Valere. Other gleemen might tell tales about it, but you could say you had it in your hands. He realized he sounded like Selene, but all that did was make him wonder where she was. There's nobody I'd rather have with us than you, Tom. Tom frowned as if considering it, but in the end he shook his head firmly. Boy, I like you well enough, but you know as well as I do that I only helped before because there was an Aes Sedai mixed in it. Segan doesn't try to cheat me more than I expect, and with the king's gift added in, I could never earn as much in the villages. To my very great surprise, Dena seems to love me, and, as much a surprise, I return the feeling. Now, why should I leave that to go be chased by Trollocs and Darkfriends? The Horn of Valere? Oh, it is a temptation, I'll admit, but no. No, I will not get mixed up in it again. He leaned over to pick up one of the wooden instrument cases, long and narrow. When he opened it, a flute lay inside, plainly made but mounted with silver. He closed it again and slid it across the table. You might need to earn your supper again someday, boy. I might at that, Rand said. At least we can talk. I will be in. The gleeman was shaking his head. A clean break is best, boy. If you're always coming around, even if you never mention it, I won't be able to get the horn out of my head, and I won't be tangled in it. I won't. After Rand left, Tom threw his cloak on the bed and sat with his elbows on the table. The Horn of Valere. How did that farm boy find? Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by them's, by the first change, was their code. your and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. He shut off that line of thought. Think about the horn too long, and he would find himself running off with Rand to carry it to Cairhienin. That would make a story carrying the Horn of Valere to the borderlands with Trollocs and Darkfriends pursuing. Scowling, he reminded himself of Dena. Even if she had not loved him, talent such as hers was not to be found every day. And she did love, even if he could not begin to imagine why. "Oh, fool," he muttered. "Aye, an old fool," Zira said from the door. He gave a start. He had been so absorbed in his thoughts that he had not heard the door open. He had known Zira for years, off and on in his wanderings, and she always took full advantage of the friendship to speak her mind. An old fool who's playing the game of houses again. Unless my ears are failing, that young lord has the sound of Andor on his tongue. He's no Cairhienin, that's for certain sure. Daes Dae'mar is dangerous enough without letting an outland lord mix you in his schemes. Thom blinked, then considered the way Rand had looked. That coat had surely been fine enough for a lord. He was growing old, letting things like that slip by him. Ruefully, he realized he was considering whether to tell Zira the truth or let her continue thinking as she did. All it takes is to think about the great game, and I start playing it. The boy is a shepherd, Zira, from the Two Rivers, she laughed scornfully, and I'm the Queen of Galedan. I tell you, the game has grown dangerous in Cairhien the last few years. Nothing like what you knew in Cairhien. There are murders done now. You'll have your throat cut for you if you don't watch out. I tell you, I am not in the great game any longer. That's all, 20 years in the past, near enough. Aye. She did not sound as if she believed it. But be that as it may, and young outland lords aside, you've begun performing at the lord's manors. They pay well, and they'll pull you into their plots as soon as they see how. They see a man and think how to use him as naturally as breathing. This young lord of yours won't help you. They will eat him alive. He gave up on trying to convince her he was out of it. Is that what you came up to say, Zira? Aye. Forget playing the great game, Thom. Marry Dena. She'll take you, the more fool her, bony and white-haired as you are. Marry her, and forget this young lord and Daes Dae'mar. I thank you for the advice, he said dryly. Marry her? Burden her with an old husband. She'll never be a bard with my past hanging around her neck. If you don't mind, Zira, I want to be alone for a while. I perform for Lady Arelyn and her guests tonight, and I need to prepare. She gave him a snort and a shake of her head and banged the door shut behind her. Thom drummed his fingers on the table. Coat or no coat, Rand was still only a shepherd. If he had been more, if he had been what Thom once suspected, a man who could channel, neither Moiraine nor any other Aes Sedai would ever have let him walk away ungentled. Horn or no horn, the boy was only a shepherd. He is out of it, he said aloud, and so am I. I do not understand it, Loial said. I was winning most of the time. And then Dena came in and joined the game, and she won it all right back. Every toss. She called it a little lesson. What did she mean by that? Rand and the Ogier were making their way through the Foregate, the bunch of grapes behind them. The sun sat low in the west, a red ball half below the horizon, throwing long shadows behind them. The street was empty, save for one of the big puppets, a goat-horned Trolloc with a sword at its belt, coming toward them with 5 men working the poles, but sounds of merriment drifted still from other parts of the Foregate, where the halls of entertainment and the taverns stood. Here, doors were already barred and windows shuttered. Rand stopped fingering the wooden flute case and slung it on his back. I suppose I couldn't expect him to throw over everything and come with me, but at least he could talk to me. Light. I wish Ingtar would show up. He stuffed his hands in his pockets and felt Celine's note. You don't suppose she? Your and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Loial paused uncomfortably. You don't suppose she cheated, do you? Everybody was grinning as if she were doing something clever. Rand shrugged at his cloak. I have to take the horn and go. If we wait for Ingtar, anything can happen. Fane will come sooner or later. I have to stay ahead of him." The men with the puppet were almost to them. "Rand," Loial said suddenly, "I don't think that's a—" Abruptly, the men let their poles clatter to the packed dirt street. Instead of collapsing, the Trolloc leaped for Rand with outstretched hands. There was no time to think. Instinct brought the sword out of its sheath in a flashing arc. The moon rises over the lakes. The Trolloc staggered back with a bubbling cry, snarling even as it fell. For an instant, everyone stood frozen. Then the men, the Darkfriends, they had to be looked from the Trolloc lying in the street to Rand, with the sword in his hands and Loial at his side. They turned and ran. Rand was staring at the Trolloc too. The void had surrounded him before his hand touched hilt. Saidin shone in his mind, beckoning, sickening. With an effort he made the void vanish and licked his lips. Without the emptiness, fear crawled on his skin. "Loial, we have to get back to the inn. Hurin's alone, and they—" He grunted as he was lifted into the air by a thick arm long enough to pin both of his to his chest. A hairy hand grabbed his throat. He caught sight of a tusked snout just over his head. A rank smell filled his nose, equal parts sour sweat and pigsty. As quickly as it had seized him, the hand at his throat was torn away. Stunned, Rand stared at it, at the thick Ogier fingers clutching the Trolloc's wrist. "Hold on, Rand." Loial's voice sounded strained. The Ogier's other hand came around and took hold of the arm still holding Rand above the ground. "Hold on." Rand was shaken from side to side as Ogier and Trolloc struggled. Abruptly, he fell free. Staggering, he took 2 steps to get clear and turned back with sword raised. Standing behind the boar-snouted Trolloc, Loial had it by wrist and forearm, holding its arms spread wide, breathing hard with the effort. The Trolloc snarled gutturally in the harsh Trolloc tongue, throwing its head back in efforts to catch Loial with a tusk. Their boots scuffled across the dirt of the street. Rand tried to find a place to put his blade in the Trolloc without hurting Loial, but Ogier and Trolloc spun in their rough dance so much that he could find no opening. With a grunt, the Trolloc pulled its left arm free, but before it could loose itself completely, Loial snapped his own arm around its neck, hugging the creature close. The Trolloc clawed at its sword. The scythe-like blade hung on the wrong side for left-handed use, but inch by inch the dark steel began sliding out of the scabbard. And still they thrashed about so that Rand could not strike without risking Loial. The power. That could do it. How, he did not know, but he knew nothing else to try. The Trolloc had its sword half unsheathed. When the curved blade was bare, it would kill Loial. Reluctantly, Rand formed the void. Saidin shone at him, pulled at him. Dimly, he seemed to recall a time when it had sung to him, but now it only drew him, a flower's perfume drawing a bee, a midden's stench drawing a fly. He opened himself up, reached for it. There was nothing there. He could as well have been reaching for light in truth. The taint slid off onto him, soiling him, but there was no flow of light inside him. Driven by distant desperation, he tried again and again, and again there was only the taint. With a sudden heave, Loial threw the Trolloc aside, so hard that the thing cartwheeled against the side of a building. It struck headfirst with a loud crack and slid down the wall to lie with its neck twisted at an impossible angle. Loial stood staring at it, his chest heaving. Rand looked out at the emptiness for a moment before he realized what had happened. As soon as he did, though, he let void and tainted light go and hurried to Loial's side. "I never, your, and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Your, and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code." Killed before, Rand. Loial drew a shuddering breath. "It would have killed you if you hadn't," Rand told him. Anxiously, he looked at the alleys and shuttered windows and barred doors. Where there were 2 Trollocs, there had to be more. "I'm sorry you had to do it, Loial, but it would have killed both of us, or worse. I know, but I cannot like it. Even a Trolloc." Pointing toward the setting sun, the Ogier seized Rand's arm. "There's another of them." Against the sun, Rand could not make out details, but it appeared to be another group of men with a huge puppet coming toward Loial and him. Except that now he knew what to look for. The puppet moved its legs too naturally, and the snouted head rose to sniff the air without anyone lifting a pole. He did not think the Trollocs and Darkfriends could see him among the evening shadows, or what lay in the street around him. They moved too slowly for that. Yet it was plain they were hunting and coming closer. "Fane knows I am out here somewhere," he said, hastily wiping his blade on a dead Trolloc's coat. "He's set them to find me. He is afraid of the Trollocs being seen, though, or he wouldn't have them disguised. If we can reach a street where there are people, we'll be safe. We have to get back to Hurin. If Fane finds him, alone with the horn, your and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code." He pulled Loial along to the next corner and turned toward the nearest sounds of laughter and music, but long before they reached it, another group of men appeared ahead of them in the otherwise empty street with a puppet that was no puppet. Rand and Loial took the next turning. It led east. Every time Rand tried to reach the music and laughter, there was a Trolloc in the way, often sniffing the air for a scent. Some Trollocs hunted by scent. Sometimes here, where there were no eyes to see, a Trolloc stalked alone. More than once he was sure it was one he had seen before. They were closing in, and making sure he and Loial did not leave the deserted streets with their shuttered windows. Slowly the two of them were forced east, away from the city and Hurin, away from other people, along narrow, slowly darkening streets that ran in all directions, uphill and down. Rand eyed the houses they passed, the tall buildings closed up tight for the night with more than a little regret. Even if he pounded on a door until someone opened it, even if they took Loial and him in, none of the doors he saw would stop a Trolloc. All that would do would be to offer up more victims with Loial and himself. "Rand," Loial said finally, "there is nowhere else to go." They had reached the eastern edge of the Foregate. The tall buildings to either side of them were the last. Lights in windows on the upper stories mocked him, but the lower floors were all shut tight. Ahead lay the hills, cloaked in first twilight and bare of so much as a farmhouse. Not entirely empty, though. He could just make out pale walls surrounding one of the larger hills, perhaps a mile away, and buildings inside. "Once they push us out there," Loial said, "they won't have to worry who sees them." Rand gestured to the walls around the hill. "Those should stop a Trolloc. It must be a lord's manor. Maybe they'll let us in. An Ogier and an outland lord? This coat has to be good for something sooner or later." He looked back down the street. No Trollocs in sight yet, but he drew Loial around the side of the building anyway. "I think that is the Illuminator's chapter house, Rand. Illuminators guard their secrets tightly. I don't think they would let Galdrian himself inside there." "What trouble have you gotten yourself into now?" said a familiar woman's voice. There was suddenly a spicy perfume in the air. Rand stared. Celine stepped around the corner they had just rounded, her white dress bright in the dimness. "How did you get here?" "What are you doing here? You have to leave immediately. Run. There are Trollocs after us." "So I saw." Her voice was dry, yet cool and composed. "I came to find you, and I find you allowing Trollocs to herd you like sheep. Can the man who possesses the Horn of Valere let himself be treated so?" "I don't have it with me," he snapped, "and I don't know how it could help if I did. The dead heroes are not supposed to come back to save me from Trollocs. Celine, you have to get away. Now." He peered around the corner. Not more than 100 paces away, a Trolloc was sticking its horned head cautiously into the street, smelling the night. A large shadow by its side had to be another Trolloc, and there were smaller shadows too. Darkfriends. "Too late," Rand muttered. He shifted the fruit case to pull off his cloak and wrap it around her. It was long enough to hide her white dress entirely and trail on the ground besides. "You'll have to hold that up to run," he told her. "Loial, if they won't let us in, we will have to find a way to sneak in." "But, Rand, would you rather wait for the Trollocs?" He gave Loial a push to start him and took Celine's hand to follow at a trot. "Find us a path that won't break our necks, Loial." "You're letting yourself become flustered," Celine said. She seemed to have less trouble following Loial in the failing light than Rand did. "Seek the oneness and be calm. One who would be great must always be calm." "The Trollocs might hear you," he told her. "I don't want greatness." He thought he heard an irritated grunt from her. Stones sometimes turned underfoot, but the way across the hills was not hard, despite the twilight shadows. Trees, and even brush, had long since been cleared from the hills for firewood. Nothing grew except knee-high grass that rustled softly around their legs. A night breeze came up softly. Rand worried that it might carry their scent to the Trollocs. Loial stopped when they reached the wall. It stood twice as high as the ogier, the stones covered with a whitish plaster. Rand peered back toward the Foregate. Bands of lighted windows reached out like spokes of a wheel from the city walls. "Loial," he said softly, "can you see them? Are they following us?" The ogier looked in the direction of the Foregate and nodded unhappily. "I only see some of the Trollocs, but they are coming this way, running." "Rand, I really don't think—" Celine cut him off. "If he wants to go in, Atlantin, he needs a door. Such as that one." She pointed to a dark patch a little down the wall. Even with her telling him, Rand was not certain it was a door, but when she strode to it and pulled, it opened. "Rand," Loial began. Rand pushed him to the door. Later, Loial. And softly, "We're hiding, remember?" He got them inside and closed the door behind them. There were brackets for a bar, but no bar to be seen. It would not stop anyone, but maybe the Trollocs would hesitate to come inside the walls. They were in an alleyway leading up the hill between two long, low, windowless buildings. At first he thought they were stone too, but then he realized the white plaster had been laid over wood. It was dark enough now for the moon reflecting from the walls to give a semblance of light. "Better to be arrested by the illuminators than taken by Trollocs," he murmured, starting up the hill. "But that is what I was trying to tell you," Loial protested. "I've heard the illuminators kill intruders. They keep their secrets hard and fast, Rand." Rand stopped dead and stared back at the door. The Trollocs were still out there. At the worst, humans had to be better to deal with than Trollocs. He might be able to talk the illuminators into letting them go. Trollocs did not listen before they killed. "I'm sorry I got you into this, Celine. Danger adds a certain something," she said softly. "And so far, you handle it well. Shall we see what we find?" She brushed past him up the alleyway. Rand followed, the spicy smell of her filling his nostrils. Atop the hill, the alleyway opened onto a wide expanse of smoothly flattened clay, almost as pale as the plaster, and nearly surrounded by more white, windowless buildings with the shadows of narrow alleys between. But to Rand's right stood one building with windows, light falling onto the pale clay. He pulled back into the shadows of the alley as a man and a woman appeared, walking slowly across the open space. Their clothes were certainly not Cairhienin. The man wore breeches as baggy as his shirt sleeves, both in a soft yellow, with embroidery on the legs of his breeches and across the chest of his shirt. The woman's dress, worked elaborately across the breast, seemed a pale green, and her hair was done in a multitude of short braids. "All is in readiness, you say?" the woman demanded. "You are certain, Tammuz?" "All?" The man spread his hands. "Always you check behind me, Aludra. All is in readiness. The display, it could be given this very moment. The gates and doors, they are all barred. All of the bread, your and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code." Her voice faded as they moved on to the far end of the lighted building. Rand studied the open area, recognizing almost nothing. In the middle of it, several dozen upright tubes, each nearly as tall as he and a foot or more across, sat on large wooden bases. From each tube, a dark, twisted cord ran across the ground and behind a low wall, perhaps 3 paces long, on the far side. All around the open space stood a welter of wooden racks with troughs and tubes and forked sticks and a score of other things. All the fireworks he had ever seen could be held in one hand, and that was as much as he knew, except that they burst with a great roar or whizzed along the ground in spirals of sparks, or sometimes shot into the air. They always came with warnings from the illuminators that opening one could cause it to go off. In any case, fireworks were too expensive for the village council to have allowed anybody unskilled to open one. He could well remember the time when Matt had tried to do just that. It was nearly a week before anyone but Matt's own mother would speak to him. The only thing that Rand found familiar at all was the cords, the fuses. That, he knew, was where you set the fire. With a glance back at the unbarred door, he motioned the others to follow and started around the tubes. If they were going to find a place to hide, he wanted to be as far from that door as he could. It meant making their way between the racks, and Rand held his breath every time he brushed against one. The things in them shifted with the slightest touch, rattling. All of them seemed to be made of wood, without a piece of metal. He could imagine the racket if one were knocked over. He eyed the tall tubes warily, remembering the bang made by one the size of his finger. If those were fireworks, he did not want to be this close to them. Loial muttered to himself continually, especially when he bumped one of the racks, then started back so fast that he bumped another. The OGA crept along in a cloud of clatters and muttering. Selene was no less unnerving. She strode as casually as if they were on a city street. She did not bump anything, did not make a sound, but she also made no effort to keep the cloak closed. The white of her dress seemed brighter than all the walls together. He peered at the lighted windows, waiting for someone to appear. All it would take was one. Selene could not fail to be seen, the alarm given. The windows remained empty, though. Rand was just breathing a sigh of relief as they approached the low wall, and the alleys and buildings behind it, when Loial brushed against another rack, standing right beside the wall. It held 10 soft-looking sticks, as long as Rand's arm, with thin streams of smoke rising from their tips. The rack made hardly a sound when it fell, the smouldering sticks sprawling across one of the fuses. With a crackling hiss, the fuse burst into flame, and the flame raced toward one of the tall tubes. Rand goggled for an instant, then he tried to whisper a shout. Behind the wall. Selene made an angry noise when he bore her to the ground behind the wall, but he did not care. He tried to spread himself over her protectively as Loial crowded beside them. Waiting for the tube to burst, he wondered if there would be anything left of the wall. There was a hollow thump that he felt through the ground as much as heard. Cautiously, he lifted himself off of Selene enough to peer around the edge of the wall. She fisted him in the ribs hard and wriggled out from under him with an oath in a language he did recognize, but he was beyond noticing. A trickle of smoke was leaking from the top of one of the tubes. That was all. He shook his head wonderingly. If that's all there is to it. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. With a crash like thunder, a huge flower of red and white bloomed high in the now dark sky, then slowly began drifting away in sparkles. As he goggled at it, the lighted building erupted with noise. Shouting men and women filled the windows, staring and pointing. Rand longingly eyed the dark alleyway only a dozen steps away, and the first step would be in full view of the people at the windows. Pounding feet poured from the building. He pressed Loial and Selene back against the wall, hoping they looked like just another shadow. "Be still and be silent," he whispered. "It's our only hope." "Sometimes," Selene said quietly, "if you are very still, no one can see you at all." She did not sound the least bit worried. Boots thumped back and forth on the other side of the wall, and voices were raised in anger, especially the one Rand recognized as Aludra. "You great buffoon, Tammuz. You great pig, you. Your mother, she was a goat, Tammuz. One day you will kill us all." "I'm not to blame for this, Aludra," the man protested. "I have been sure to put everything where it belonged, and the punks they were. You will not speak to me, Tammuz. A great pig does not deserve to speak like a human." Aludra's voice changed in answer to another man's question. "There is no time to prepare another. Goldrian, he must be satisfied with the rest for tonight. And one early. And you, Tammuz, you will set everything right, and tomorrow you will leave with the carts to buy the manure. Does anything else go wrong this night, I will not trust you again even with so much as the manure." Footsteps faded back toward the building to the accompaniment of Aludra's muttering. Tammuz remained, growling under his breath about the unfairness of it all. Rand stopped breathing as the man came over to right the toppled stand. Pressed back in the shadows against the wall, he could see Tammuz's back and shoulder. All the man had to do was turn his head, and he could not miss seeing Rand and the others. Still complaining to himself, Tammuz arranged the smouldering sticks in the stand, then stalked off toward the building where everyone else had gone. Letting his breath go, Rand took a quick look after the man, then pulled back into the shadows. A few people still stood at the windows. "We can't expect any more luck tonight," he whispered. "It is said great men make their own luck," Selene said softly. "Will you stop that?" he told her wearily. He wished the smell of her did not fill his head, so it made it hard to think clearly. He could remember the feel of her body when he pushed her down, softness and firmness in a disturbing blend, and that did not help either. Rand, Loial, was peering around the end of the wall away from the lighted building. "I think we need some more luck, Rand." Rand shifted to look over the OGA's shoulder. Beyond open space, in the alleyway that led to the barless door, 3 Trollocs were peering cautiously out of the shadows toward the lighted windows. One woman was standing at a window. She did not seem to see the Trollocs. "So," Selene said quietly, "it becomes a trap. These people may kill you if they take you. The Trollocs surely will. But perhaps you can slay the Trollocs too quickly for them to make any outcry. Perhaps you can stop the people from killing you to preserve their little secrets. You may not want greatness, but it will take a great man to do these things." "You don't have to sound happy about it," Rand said. He tried to stop thinking about how she smelled, how she felt, and the void almost surrounded him. He shook it away. The Trollocs did not seem to have located them yet. He settled back, staring at the nearest dark alleyway. Once they made a move toward it, the Trollocs would surely see, and so would the woman at the window. It would be a race as to whether Trollocs or Illuminators reached them first. "Your greatness will make me happy." Despite the words, Selene sounded angry. "Perhaps I should leave you to find your own way for a time. If you'll not take greatness when it is in your grasp, perhaps you deserve to die." Rand refused to look at her. "Loial, can you see if there's another door down that alley?" The OGA shook his head. "There is too much light here and too much dark there. If I were in the alley, yes." Rand fingered the hilt of his sword. "Take Selene. As soon as you see a door, if you do call out, and I'll follow. If there isn't a door at the end, you will have to lift her so she can reach the top of the wall and climb over." "All right, Rand." Loial sounded worried. "But when we move, those Trollocs will come after us no matter who is watching. Even if there is a door, they will be on our heels. You let me worry about the Trollocs, 3 of them. I might do it with the void." The thought of Saidin decided him. Too many strange things had happened when he let the male half of the true source come close. "I will follow as soon as I can. Go." He turned to peer around the wall at the Trollocs. From the corner of his eye, he had an impression of Loial's bulk moving, of Selene's white dress half covered by his cloak. One of the Trollocs beyond the tubes pointed to them excitedly, but still the 3 hesitated, glancing up at the window where the woman still watched. 3 of them. There has to be a way. Not the void, not Saidin. "There is a door," came Loial's soft call. One of the Trollocs took a step out of the shadows, and the others followed, gathering themselves. As from a distance, Rand heard the woman at the window cry out, and Loial shouted something. Without thinking, Rand was on his feet. He had to stop the Trollocs somehow, or they would run him down, and Loial and Selene. He snatched one of the smouldering sticks and hurled himself at the nearest tube. It tilted, started to fall over, and he caught the square wooden base. The tube pointed straight at the Trollocs. They slowed uncertainly. The woman at the window screamed, and Rand touched the smoking end of the stick to the fuse right where it joined the tube. The hollow thump came immediately, and the thick wooden base slammed against him, knocking him down. A roar like a thunderclap broke the night, and a blinding burst of light tore away the dark. Blinking, Rand staggered to his feet, coughing in thick, acrid smoke, ears ringing. He stared in amazement. Half the tubes and all of the racks lay on their sides, and one corner of the building beside which the Trollocs had stood was simply gone, flames licking at ends of planks and rafters. Of the Trollocs there was no sign. Through the ringing in his ears, Rand heard shouts from the illuminators in the building. He broke into a tottering run, lumbered into the alley. Halfway down it, he stumbled over something and realized it was his cloak. He snatched it up without pausing. Behind him, the cries of the illuminators filled the night. Loial was bouncing impatiently on his feet beside the open door, and he was alone. "Where is Selene?" Rand demanded. "She went back, Rand." "I tried to grab her, and she slipped right out of my hands." Rand turned back toward the noise. Through the incessant sound in his ears, some of the shouts were barely distinguishable. There was light there now, from the flames. The sand buckets. "Fetch the sand buckets quickly. This is disaster." Disaster. Some of them went that way. Loial grabbed Rand's shoulder. "You cannot help her, Rand. Not by being taken yourself. We must go." Someone appeared at the end of the alley, a shadow outlined by the glow of flames behind, and pointed toward them. "Come on, Rand." Rand let himself be pulled out of the door into the darkness. The fire faded behind them until it was only a glow in the night, and the lights of the Foregate came closer. Rand almost wished more Trollocs would appear, something he could fight. But there was only the night breeze ruffling the grass. "I tried to stop her," Loial said. There was a long silence. "We really couldn't have done anything. They would just have taken us, too." Rand sighed. "I know, Loial. You did what you could." He walked backwards a few steps, staring at the glow. It seemed less. The illuminators must be putting out the flames. "I have to help her somehow." "How?" "Say, Dean." "The power?" He shivered. "I have to." They went through the Foregate, by the lighted streets, wrapped in a silence that shut out the gaiety around them. When they entered, the defender of the Dragon Wall, the innkeeper held out his tray with a sealed parchment. Rand took it and stared at the white seal. A crescent moon and stars. Who left this? When? "An old woman, my lord. Not a quarter of an hour gone. A servant, though she did not say from what house." Quale smiled as if inviting confidences. "Thank you," Rand said, still staring at the seal. The innkeeper watched them go upstairs with a thoughtful look. Hurin took his pipe out of his mouth when Rand and Loial entered the room. Hurin had his short sword and swordbreaker on the table, wiping them with an oily rag. "You along with the gleeman, my lord." "Is he well?" Rand gave a start. "Hard? What?" "Tom, yes he's. Your and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code. Your and bought, by the hops in hundreds people, by thems, by the first change, was their code." He broke open the seal with his thumb and read, "When I think I know what you're going to do, you do something else. You are a dangerous man. Perhaps it will not be long before we are together again. Think of the horn, think of the glory, and think of me, for you are always mine." Again it bore no signature, but the flowing hand itself. "Are all women crazy?" Rand demanded of the ceiling. Hurin shrugged. Rand threw himself into the other chair, the one sized for an ogier. His feet dangled above the floor, but he did not care. He stared at the blanket-covered chest under the edge of Royal's bed. "Think of the glory. I wish Ingtar would come."